The aircraft was fully prepared for takeoff, and passengers were settling into their seats, adjusting their belongings, and preparing for the journey ahead. Among them sat an elderly black man, his fingers trembling slightly as they gripped his boarding pass. His name was Mr. Elijah Carter. Flying was nothing new to him. He had done it numerous times before, but for some reason, something about this flight felt different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was an unsettling tension in the air. As he made himself comfortable, a sharp voice suddenly cut through the low hum of conversation. "Sir, I need you to step off the plane," the flight attendant said, her tone firm, her expression unreadable. Elijah blinked, momentarily stunned. He looked around, confused. No one else was being asked to leave. What was going on? "I'm sorry," he asked, his voice polite yet uncertain. The flight attendant, a woman with an almost mechanical coldness in her eyes, crossed her arms. "You're making other passengers uncomfortable," she stated flatly. A hush fell over the cabin. The elderly man's face lost its color. His stomach tightened. His heartbeat quickened. What was happening here?
And why?
But what no one on that plane knew was that in just 5 minutes, this very flight attendant would find herself humiliated in front of everyone. This story will leave you speechless. Watch until the very end to find out what happened. And before we continue, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. Elijah Carter had spent decades of his life working hard, shaping young minds, and earning the respect of his peers. A retired history professor, he had always believed in the values of dignity and justice. He had purchased a first-class ticket for a very special occasion, to surprise his granddaughter at her graduation. This flight was supposed to be filled with excitement and joy, a moment he had been looking forward to for months. As he walked down the aisle, he greeted a young mother cradling her baby with a warm smile. He nodded to the business travelers who were glued to their laptops, typing away furiously. Finally reaching his seat, he settled in, adjusted his reading glasses, and let out a content sigh.
But then he noticed something.
Across the aisle, a well-dressed woman in her mid-50s was whispering to the flight attendant. Their eyes met for just a brief second before the attendant nodded and turned towards him. "Sir," she said, her voice cold and authoritative, "I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane." Elijah's brow furrowed in confusion. "Excuse me? Is there a problem?" The flight attendant's lips pressed into a tight line. "There's been a complaint." His heart pounded in his chest. A complaint? About what? For a long moment, she hesitated, as if debating whether to say the next words out loud. Then, finally, she spoke, and her words sent an icy chill down his spine. "You don't belong here." A ripple of discomfort spread through the passengers. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But no one spoke up. Elijah inhaled deeply, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am," he said, holding up his ticket, "I paid for this seat. I belong here." The flight attendant's expression remained unchanged. "If you don't comply, security will remove you." Across the aisle, the woman who had whispered earlier sat back, arms crossed, a smug look of satisfaction on her face. And then, "This is ridiculous," a voice rang out. Heads turned. A young man in a hoodie had stood up several rows back. "He didn't do anything," he protested. Another voice chimed in, an older woman, shaking her head in disgust. "This is shameful." The flight attendant's face reddened. "This is none of your concern," she snapped. Elijah's chest tightened. This wasn't just about a seat.
This wasn't just about him.
This was about something far greater.
It was about dignity.
About history. About the past repeating itself. He gripped the armrest, forcing himself to stay calm. And then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the aisle. A commanding voice broke through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" The captain had arrived. The flight attendant straightened, lifting her chin. "Yes, Captain. This passenger refuses to leave after a complaint was made." The captain's sharp gaze flicked between her and Elijah. "What kind of complaint?" She hesitated. Passengers felt uncomfortable. A slow frown spread across the captain's face. "Uncomfortable? Is there a safety issue?" The attendant swallowed. "No, but Is he being disruptive? Silence. She clenched her jaw. No, but... The captain's expression darkened. Then why are you asking him to leave? The plane was dead silent. Passengers held their breath. The tension was suffocating. The captain turned to Elijah. Sir, may I see your ticket? With slightly shaking hands, Elijah handed it over. The captain took one glance at it before turning back to the attendant. He has a first-class ticket, he said, his voice firm. He's exactly where he belongs. The flight attendant's mouth opened, but no words came out. But you... The captain cut her off. His voice was ice-cold. You, he said, are out of line. And then he did something that no one expected. He reached for the intercom. To all passengers, his voice boomed over the speakers, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable behavior from a member of our crew. This does not reflect our values, and I assure you this situation will be addressed immediately. A murmur spread through the cabin. Then, applause. Passengers clapped. Some even stood up. The flight attendant's face was drained of color. And moments later, a supervisor boarded the plane. A whispered conversation. A nod. And then, Miss, you need to step off the aircraft. I was just following procedure, she stammered. No, the captain's voice was firm. You were following prejudice. The moment she walked off, the cabin erupted in applause. Elijah exhaled, the weight on his chest finally lifting. But he knew this moment wasn't just about him. It was about something far more important. As the plane took off, the young woman beside him leaned in and whispered, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Elijah gave her a small, sad smile. It's happened before, he said softly. But this time, he looked around, at the young man who had spoken up, at the passengers who had refused to stay silent. This time, people spoke up. And that made all the difference. Because racism thrives in silence. And today, silence lost. Do you think justice was served? Let us know in the comments below.